Let's move to agenda item 5, Law and Licensing Committee Report. We'll turn time over to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. The first item we have is 5.2 Garfield County School District waiver request, and it was my understanding that the superintendent intended to be here. If I could ask AAG Beal on the status of.
Please, AAG Beal.
Yes, I believe Superintendent Dodds was supposed to be here. I don't know that he is, so.
Could I suggest, yeah, and that's okay. And this is a heavy lift here, so Chair Carey, will you take liberties to adjust agenda items as you feel needed?
Yep. Thank you. With the consent of the board, I would just hold item 5.2 until Superintendent Dodds arrives and just continue as outlined in the agenda.
Any opposition? Okay, let's proceed.
Okay. The next item is item 5.3. That's right. 5.4. As 5.3 is set for a time certain. 5.4 is a board policy 3006 data governance plan. And the motion before the board is that the board approve board policy 3006 data governance plan draft 2. And it's my understanding we have someone from staff prepared to address that matter. Oh, draft 3? Yep. Apologies, draft 3. So the motion before the board is that the board approve board policy 3006 data governance plan draft 3.
Okay. Let me just ask for clarity. Draft 2 came out of committee and draft 3 is now a substitute. I just want to get my ducks in a row here. Or did draft 3 come out of committee? Do you remember, Chair? Or we have Director Rasmussen approaching the stand as well. Yeah. Thank you. Ben, please.
Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. So draft 2 is the committee motion. We got a request from Chair Carey and Board Member Hall after the committee to make a few amendments, and that's what's included in draft 3.
But if, Chair, if the draft that came out of committee was draft 2, I'd be more comfortable presenting that and we could just make a motion to amend, unless the.
Well, by making a substitute motion, that's what you're doing.
Okay.
Yep.
Draft 3 contains those amendments.
So for the public and board's understanding, draft 2 came out of committee. We're going to say there is a substitute motion by Chair Carey to adopt draft 3. Does that sound correct?
That would be
and would that be something? I'm speaking for you, Chair Carey, but is that your substitute motion?
It is.
Thank you. So perfect, and that's seconded. The motion before the board then is that the board approve board policy 3006 draft 3. We have a couple lights. We'll go member Bogus, or actually, I'm going to turn it back to Chair Carey to speak to this motion, and then we're going to go to member Lear.
Yeah, if I could just speak to the motion. The language that I noticed and wanted inserted into the new draft was one of the items that triggered this proposed rule was an over-the-shoulder request for data by one of our LEAs. And that was the impetus for, wow, we really need better policy and rule to govern that procedure. And so working with Ben and Director Chalice, you'll see on lines 163 and 164 is the language on defining what an over-the-shoulder review actually entails. So there's no ambiguity in that process or definition. The other changes were suggested by staff. Those are lines 193 through 198.
Give us just a minute.
Sure.
If that's okay. 193 to 198.
8. No, if there's questions, I'm happy to address those or staff, but I just wanted to point out what the two changes were.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, let's turn to Member Lear and then over to Member Bogus.
My question was going to be exactly what Chair Carey just did to identify, because this is a longer policy than most, and I wanted to see where the changes were between drafts 2 and 3. The other request I'd make, and I just noted 3 of them, it's going to sound tedious and buggy to some of you, but we are the Department of Education. Data is a plural word. So I've just noted throughout, would you please go through and make sure that the verbs that follow data are plural? I'm sorry, that's just,
Can
and
you-
I've
can-
noted lines 158,
yeah.
165, and 206, and I haven't gotten to the end.
If staff can work
no
with English teacher
condemnation, no
Lear.
blame. I just want us to be an example for the rest of our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lear. We'll get it cleaned up.
That would be appreciated.
Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. So, if I may, through the chair, to Chair Carey, Chair Carey, I'm wondering, in line, I believe it is 206 through 209. It appears in the way this is articulated that PII can be reviewed but not exported. Is that how you read that language, sir?
Thank you. Thank you. I would defer to staff on the exact interpretation. I know that we did want extra precautions in place when it came to these over-the-shoulder reviews. And we thought we sufficiently addressed that in 206, that internal student data is not disclosed in an over-the-shoulder review. And in 208, no student PII or de-identified student data may be exported during an over-the-shoulder review, which would seem to suggest that it is visible during that review. But I would defer to staff and ask if that is their understanding as well.
Director Chalice, please. Member Bogus, before we turn to Director Chalice, does that answer your question, or are you seeking more
I
clarity?
think she's going to answer the
Perfect.
question.
Okay.
Yes, but that does help redefine. Yes, thank you, sir.
We might have another
Can I-
question that might add to your answer,
Yeah.
Katie.
So this came up, I just want to make sure I'm in the right context, in the right space here. This came up because in LEA, a traditional LEA was concerned about the number of students that were designated in their area as going to a charter. And so the LEA was concerned that that was an accurate number and wanted to just review the data, correct? So a traditional LEA was concerned about that. Is this what we're talking about, over the shoulder review? Okay, I'm getting in the right space.
Thank you. Katie?
Thanks. Director Chalice, or Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. I often struggle with my job title when I come up here. I think to answer your question, Member Bogus, I'm going to explain the one application of this that has happened thus far. I think that's probably the easiest way to explain it to you and the board. As Vice Chair Hart mentioned, the impetus for this new over-the-shoulder review piece of the policy was a school district was concerned that they were basically concerned that the data that USB has was invalid, or some was invalid, because they had seen a spike in the number of students that were reported to be attending charter schools, for which that school district had to pay out, the way the funding works. And they reached out to USB and said, hey, we're worried about this. And so that came as a data request to the Law and Licensing Committee. The Law and Licensing Committee expressed interest in allowing the school district to sort of challenge USB-E data, but in a way that wouldn't require an actual export of that data. So what was discussed in that meeting, which I believe took place in maybe September or October, was direction to staff to facilitate this over-the-shoulder review. And that gets me to my point of explaining what that looks like. So the business administrator for the district in question came into the office, myself, Director Aaron Braff, I believe Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones was present. So staff prepared a map with data points, like basically dots on a map that indicated the students that our data suggested were attending charter schools. I would argue that no PII was disclosed in that meeting. However, in the case that this type of request ever came forward again, there is a small risk of disclosing PII if an individual were to zoom in on that map. So imagine we zoomed into a street level, for example, then the business administrator would in theory be able to see, oh, I can see that that's house number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the intention is to never disclose PII if we don't have to. But the policy also allows for that in the case that, as a part of validating the information, drilling into that level is necessary. And Chair, I hope that answers the question.
Member Bogus, does that answer your question? It does answer my question. Perfect. Thank you. So let me go back to the motion that's before the board here. The motion is that the board approve board policy 3006 draft 3. And without seeing any additional lights, Member Davis.
Just want to make sure it's understood. None of this data is being taken with anybody. It's not going into their systems. They're coming here, verifying the numbers. And, okay.
Perfect. Member Bogus.
Thank you, Chair. So, Director Chalice, if I could, would it be beneficial that we add that this must be in person into this document as opposed to over Zoom where people can screen record, among other things? Would that be beneficial to the privacy of our people in this state?
Can I take a stab at that?
Yeah.
Katie, I know that's directed at you, but I believe line 203.
Oh, okay. So I do see that, I guess, in the director's analysis, she talked about over Zoom something.
Do you want to?
And so maybe I misunderstood what she said.
No, let's get clarity here. Director Rasmussen, just let us know 162 through 164. And Ben to the rescue. Come on in.
Just pointing out that the definition that we're adding as a result of Chair Carey's substitute motion would limit this to it has to be at the USBE office. A Zoom call would not meet that definition.
That answers the question. Thank you. So the motion before the board then is that the board approves board policy 3006 data governance plan draft 3. Let's go ahead and vote. Member Green? Oh, she's here. Thank you. You just snuck in. I don't even know what door you came. That passes unanimously. All board members are here in person, so great. Thank you. Back to Chair Carey.
Oh, Superintendent. His timing is impeccable because if we started this next matter, you would be here for a very long time. So your timing is perfect, Superintendent Dodds. With the Chair's acknowledgement and permission, I'd like to go back to the first agenda item, which is 5.2, Garfield County School waiver request. And I know this body is familiar with these requests. And I believe that AAG Beal and Superintendent Dodds will be available to present and answer questions.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, did I make the motion for the
You
board?
have not.
Okay.
Please.
The motion for the board is that the board approve Garfield County School District's request for a waiver from R277-419. Thank you.
Thank you. So the motion before the board is that the board approve Garfield County School District's request for a waiver from R277-419, Section 4. Superintendent Dodds, I don't see any questions yet, but will you just take a moment? We appreciate you joining us here today. And yes, please, we have the information. Is there, and maybe I could turn to Chair Carey as well. They've gone through this in committee. But can you just speak to the board on this so we can hear it from you, Superintendent, on how this is going to best accommodate your community? And go ahead and push your.
Work? You can now hear me. Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's so exciting to see familiar faces, and I know how much work you put in, and I know how sometimes you don't get the gratitude that you deserve. We watch you from Garfield County School District, and we see the work you do, and it means a lot to us that you have such interest in our students. Yeah, so to speak to our process, really most important to us was the process. What was nice is that no one in our system had an agenda for wanting this necessarily, and that made our process significantly easier. For us, it was a curiosity of how does this best serve our students, and is this best for our school and community? And so what we did is we did the research. We spent time on the research and did a tour across the county, and we presented the overall big picture as to what could be possible with the 4-day week and what could be possible negatives to the 4-day week. What we found was the most important thing was that we kept instructional time. We found that if we can keep that instructional time, that will be essential. So that has been a big priority for us. And then with the research we found afterwards, we allowed all stakeholders to have input, and it was, when it gets to 90%, 80% right in there, it's not a community request, it's a community demand, right? That this is the direction we go. We're excited because it's increasing our capacity and allowing us permission to go through all of our processes of how we instruct and what's the most important and most valuable part of instruction and teaching and learning. And we're actually really eager to engage in that work, and we're confident that it's going to result in really positive things for Garfield County.
Thank you, Superintendent. Chair Carey.
Thank you, Superintendent Dodds. This is something that our board has looked at for several schools and districts, and the board has actually, done research or spoken with researchers on this subject. If there was no particular impetus for this, you just went around the district and looked, what influence, if any, did the neighboring LEAs adopting the shortened not instructional, but school time, did that play any role, and if so, how much, in your decision to say, let's move in this direction? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, absolutely. It sparked the curiosity, right? So I don't think anybody, at least in my experience that I walked into, again, we're passionate one way or the other. As we began the process, it just sparked the curiosity. So two things we found is that other districts are doing it and that it is possible, right? So we could no longer move forward with the solution that we don't do that or we can't do that. It now had to be, let's sincerely review and determine if this is in our best interest. And so that's kind of about the majority of the influence that it had for us.
Thank you, Superintendent. Back to Chair Carey.
And my last question, Chair, and then does your LEA have any process or procedure in place for automatic or continual review in terms of, you laid out expertly in your submission how one of your goals is to make sure that this does positively impact your students. Could you explain to the board what processes or procedures you have in place to review this throughout the upcoming year? Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, that is a big desire for us. One of the challenges in education is there are so many variables as to why students don't learn, right? And also many variables as to why they may be learning. And so we hope that this is a part of our continuous improvement plan as a process. I think one of the mistakes we make, and I'm curious to do even more research on this at some point in my lifetime, but one of the mistakes we make is we believe that a program or a structure will solve the problem. And I think that's flawed thinking, that if we think that the schedule is going to make the difference, or the 4-day week is going to make the difference, I think what that does is actually structures often help reinforce whatever cultural thing we want to do, right? So our focus on this is a continuous improvement plan, and obviously a variable that will be a major part of that is, did the 4-day week allow us to engage in the process that made improvement learn, or that improved learning? And if we feel like the 4-day week was more of a barrier to that process, then we'd be willing to relook at that and even go a different direction.
Thank you, Superintendent. Member Davis.
I'm sorry if I'm a bit slow. On the question that was first asked by Member Carey, I just didn't quite catch. So when you studied other neighboring folks who had done this 10-day or the 4-day, but preserved instructional time, you said you had found that their students, you know, when you juxtapose the 4-day and the 5-day, had been able to continue learning at similar levels if the hours were preserved. Is that right?
Close. Am I good to respond here? So we were cautious to not stay with one district or even a few districts. Our goal was to try to research much more broadly, right? What is likely to happen here? And again, there's inherent pros and cons to a 4-day week. If anybody comes and says this is the magical wand, you probably want to be a little bit cautious there, right? So what we found is a trend. There's a trend nationwide, schools, especially rural school districts, moving to a 4-day week. This is a significant trend going very large across the nation. And they found patterns. So that's where the patterns were coming from. They weren't coming from our own research or study from neighboring districts or even from the state of Utah alone, but more on a national trend. And what we found is that instructional time, one of the articles that I read that I loved is less more, right? How's that possible? And what they found is, no, it's not. You have to protect the hours of instructional time. And if you do everything you've always done with less hours, you're likely to get less product, right? So two things that we're looking at. One is we have to be more efficient at what we do, and second is that we have to protect that instructional time and those hours that we've had in the past.
For preserved learning, your data showed
Correct.
that
For
the
learning.
learning can be
For
preserved.
learning, that was only focused on learning, right? So correct. So if we kept, so for example, 990 is what the state measurement is, and what we found is districts that would have dropped below that, likely, not always, right? But the trend was that they would drop as well. So our goal is to preserve those hours, make sure that what we had the years before are protected for the upcoming years. And then the second part that we found was that, again, all the other indicators from learning is the primary focus of what we do. And then there's the whole child, all of the other things that allow the district to succeed. One thing we also found is just a simple side effect, and this is just anecdotal, but we went to a career fair yesterday, and I was surprised how many times teachers expressed more interest and desire to come to a rural area, which they may not be interested in the first place because of our remoteness, that suddenly that they were somewhat interested and signed up for interviews, right? So for us, that may not be as essential to larger areas, but when you're that far away from anything and you're that isolated, that 3-day week or 3-day weekend can really make a difference. So if we can get both things, why not?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Vice Chair Hart and then Member Bogus.
Yeah, so one thing that, and it kind of extends on what people are asking, what really intrigued me is the statement, extended school days allow for more in-depth instruction and the incorporation of innovative teaching methods to enhance student engagement and learning outcomes. Talk to us more about what you found in that innovative teaching method space and what what kind of changes you're looking at there that allow you to move to a 4-day week but still preserve that instructional density. What innovative teaching methods and changes are you doing to instruction?
Yeah, recognize the terminology there is allows for, right? Not that we have necessarily discovered and are applying, right? So some of the ideas that come to mind is the flexibility, right? It's the flexibility of being able to. As I mentioned before, if we use this as the magic wand to learning, we will all be sadly disappointed, right? To suggest that because we're going to a 4-day week inherently alone is going to make the difference, we will all be disappointed. What we are excited about and what I'm seeing my teachers engage in is these conversations and discussions. So if we go to this 4-day week, what then would we need to do to increase learning? One of which is what you just described, which is, for example, as a science teacher, when I had a block of 50 minutes the likelihood of me being able to engage with learning with students to where they fully understood the concept in that same day were very low, right? As you shift to a block of time that gives you more 70 minutes, 80 minutes, the likelihood of me being able to have a full lesson and a complete, lab and a follow-up understanding of why we did that significantly increases. Now there's winners and losers to that, right? So for example, when we did that with a block schedule, maybe your foreign language wouldn't have the same exam, they want daily connection. What this allows is for that flexibility within the schedule.
Thank you. And Member Bogus.
Thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the questions. And I've learned very recently, I've done a lot of research on 4-day school weeks in about the past 2 weeks. And there is a desire of teachers, they'll drive 30, 40 miles for a 4-day school week. It's a real thing. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. My question is, what does your teacher workday look like Monday through Thursday? Preserving student hours is one thing, but when we've got a capacity issue dealing with tiny humans, what does that look like? Can you help me understand that better?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. I keep interrupting. I apologize. I'm just jumping right in. So one of the challenges of taking over a new district, I'm relatively new to the district, 5 years now as the superintendent. And you walk into tradition and history and culture, right? One of the cultural things is what's been decided on what hours will work and won't work. And, you want to honor those negotiations from the past. And one of the biggest challenges I think all leaders walk into is when do we do capacity building? To me, that's the most important thing right now. I mean, it's just a huge piece that our challenges are growing in education, and we've got to increase our capacity. So actually in this case, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to make sure you were looking this direction. I want to make sure there wasn't somebody that you needed to point to. Okay. It's a chair. Okay. All right. There you go. Yeah. But again, keeping not just instructional time, but also teacher time to that peak. And so for us, we'll be returning back on one Friday a month. Allows times for teachers to actually be provided with professional development and targeted professional development. And that's something that we haven't had in the past that I'm really excited for.
Thank you. So the motion before the board is that the board approve Garfield County School District's request for a waiver from R277-419, Section 4. Seeing no additional lights, let's go ahead and vote. That passes unanimously, one of the quicker votes. So thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate your time. Thank you. We're going to go back to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. This is item 5.5, Board Policy 2002, Board Officer Elections Procedures Amendment. And the motion for the board is that the board approve Board Policy 2002, Board Officer Elections Procedures, Draft 3. And then, Chair, if I may speak to that.
Absolutely. Please, we'll just, instead of restating, go ahead.
Thank you. Just by way of explanation, the committee passed out Draft 2. This is a Draft 3. The reason for that is after staff had a chance to review the amendments that we had made in committee, we discussed with them 2 changes, and you'll see those in green on Draft 3. One is on lines 31 and 32, which was to make sure that it was understood that the votes would be electronic and not necessarily paper. And the other one is on line 57, where the responsibility for announcing the votes would fall to board staff and not the vice chair.
Thank you, Chair Carey. This sounds, again, like a substitute motion. No? Draft 3 did come. Okay. Just making sure.
Is it? Oh,
Okay.
apologies. Oh, did you?
Okay, perfect. So the motion before the board is that the board approve Board Policy 2002, Board Officer Elections Procedures Draft 3. We've heard from Chair Carey speaking on that. Let's move to Member Davis.
Hi, thanks. I just want to be clear on what the procedure is if for board chair or one of the vice chairs or something, it consistently becomes a 5-5-5 split. What's the next step? Do you do the ranked choice voting if you can't get past that on multiple rounds?
That's a great question, and I don't remember that discussion in committee. Can we turn to Chair Carey?
So that would be addressed on lines 54 and 55, which I believe outlines we continue to vote until that tie is broken.
Well, what if it doesn't get broken?
So I guess the question is the possibility that there is a three-way split. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, yeah, because people, let's be honest, can be stubborn.
Who?
So
Can you call
I'm just
some
saying,
names?
I don't love.
Don't do that.
I don't
Don't
love
call.
ranked choice voting either, in general. But I'm just saying, do we need it as a caveat if after three rounds and it's nobody wants to give and it's 5-5-5, then do we move to a rank and everybody puts a first and a second and that's what figures it out?
Well, let me, because I think you have a good point, and let me ask this to the board. I think the committee has done a great job going through this and getting the work done. There's no rush for this, not for another year and 10 months. So we have some time. Would it be in the best interest of board members to say, hey, let's consider this, throw this back to committee and consider this? Or would it be something that we feel like we could tackle now? Now, with that thought, somebody can propose a motion if not, but we'll turn back over to Member Davis and then we'll
All
go
right.
lights as
I'll
usual.
propose a motion, and if it doesn't work, we can send it back to committee. And this is on the fly. So, but I would move to amend to add, after 3 rounds of a tie vote, there is a ranked choice vote where all members put. Would it be a first and a second, or a first, second, and third? How does that work? Just first and a second?
Ranked choice, I believe you would put however many candidates, or
You
is
could
it?
put 3, you could do 3 names.
So do we have
order.
a drafter of that motion? Or a draft of that motion? There is a drafter somewhere in there. Will you
Or
just
you
keep
say
an eye on
members
that?
would put at least 2.
Keep an eye on this, Member
Okay.
Davis. Make sure this captures what your intent is.
Probably after those lines that talk about the tie, that says we'll just keep voting. I mean, after 3 rounds, you can tell people are pretty much going to be digging their heels in. If it doesn't happen in the next 2, you probably need something in place.
Do we have, so I've got, remember Lear's light on. I'm guessing that's to a different. Okay, it's to a different, the original motion. So this is an amendment here that Member Davis, does your amendment on the screen, and I've got questions to your amendment.
Sure.
Okay, so the amendment is, I'm sorry. Yeah, do we have a second? Okay, so we have a second. And so the motion before the board is that the board add after line 56, after 3 rounds of a tie vote, the board may use a ranked choice voting process where members must rank at least 2 candidates for the position. I'm going to go back to Member Davis to speak to her motion, and then we've got Member Carey and Member Earl in the queue. No, Member Davis, are you going to speak to this?
Well, it would apply. The only way you can have a tie on a 15-member board is 5-5-5.
Are you speaking to this
Yes,
or
sorry,
speaking to Jenny?
I am multitasking. I don't need to speak to it. I mean, look, if it ends up 5-5, the only way you can have a tie is 5-5-5. And if that happens and you hit 3 times, you have to have something in place that's going to let people go home.
Yes, Member Carey.
Yeah, I like the direction of Board Member Davis's motion. My concerns would be that it's not just a tie that would put us in this situation, but if no member receives, as it says here, at least the vote of 8 members. So I'm not sure if just confining it to a tie would prevent this scenario from playing out. So if that makes sense, you need a majority vote, and this just anticipates a tie, but it's also possible of 7-7 and an abstention. So I don't know the language, but I would suggest that, right, that it conform to the support of at least 8 members. And that way we avoid all those scenarios. And the other one is if this could maybe considered a friendly, but where it's being dictated that members must rank at least 2 candidates, I think that forces a vote where someone may just not think there's another qualified candidate. So if you would consider a may instead of a, does it say shall? Must. So a may instead of a must.
Member Davis.
But sure. Because because then everyone's going to say, well, if we don't put anybody, then we'll get our person because other people's going to put, so then you're still in the same boat. No, I get it. I'm just saying, I'm fine.
So we have some things going on here, right? We have an amendment that's on the floor. We have a potential amendment to an amendment. There was some asking if it's friendly. Not really a response. There was
Okay,
some
it's
changes
friendly,
in this.
May.
Well, so what I'm going to ask then, Member
go.
Davis, is look at this motion, because if it's friendly, it's still yours. Look at this motion and make sure that it still.
Can get to some kind of resolution.
Thank you. We have Member Leary, you have a point of order, or? Okay, so we'll go. We've got Member Earl, and then Member Lear, and then Member Bogus.
Yeah, I just asked Michelle check with Robert's Rules of Order, which didn't help. So because it said that normally the chair coin toss instead of a vote. I think you get to a coin toss instead of a vote. I think you get to a point where it is a coin toss instead of a. I just can't see if I were going to vote for someone, I'm not going to vote. Okay, and then I would put someone second. Maybe that's not the way to think about that, but.
I can go to Member Lear and she can defer, or I can go to. Please, Member Davis.
In the interest of time, if it's friendly to the body, and I guess Chair, you would have to ask that, but Member Bogus asked that we just say the board may use a ranked choice voting process, period. Because if there are 3 people running, you could list 3 in a rank. If there are 2, you can list 2. People can, and I guess people can't, and then you're back to that, who's going to call who's bluff or whatever. But so let's just drop that off. And if people don't want it, they can vote no, or we can send it back to committee. But let's just see if it passes. I personally would rather have members have an opportunity to have a say in a rank position than flipping a coin. Personally, and then just leave it to random fate. But I know others might feel differently.
Okay, just by raise of hand, because we have some lights. Is there any opposition to removing that verbiage at the end of that? It's gone now, so is there any opposition to that? Seeing none, let's get back into discussion then. We got Member Lear and then to Member Bogus.
And I want to make sure I have an opportunity at the end also to make my comment, but sorry. But my comment to this amendment is I think it should say shall. The may, as we changed it, yes, but I think it should say shall use a ranked choice voting, so we don't get in a situation where the members say, well, no, we can keep voting till the cows come home. I think it should be a shall.
So is this an amendment?
Amendment to the amendment.
Amendment to the amendment. So There's a motion that the word may be changed to shall. Is there any opposition to that? We have some opposition, so let's open this amendment up. So let's make this a formal motion here. Member Lear, let's make sure we have your amendment to the amendment correct. It's been pre-seconded.
Only because I told her to.
Have me on the opposite. That was time.
Let's see. Let's see. I want to make sure the other one is a may, though. Shall. Well, but the process of ranked choice voting is what I want it to switch to. Because I don't want board members to say, well, we don't have to do this. We could still keep voting till midnight.
So, Member Lear, it's a simple motion, but does this capture?
Yeah, let me make sure. The board, after 3 rounds where no member receives the support of a majority of the board may, yes, I want it to say shall use ranked choice. There was another must in there, but it went away, I guess, in the discussion.
Let me get this motion then, and then it's been seconded, we'll have you speak to it. But the motion before the board is that the board change may to shall, so it will now read shall use a ranked choice voting process.
Great.
Member Lear, would you like to
I
speak?
think I've pretty much spoken to it, but I think it's important that we have a definitive second process in place, so there's not discussion in the middle of the vote if we need to proceed to some other way. And to add to Member Davis's point earlier about stubbornness and that, I think this is also a process that promotes cooperation, collaboration, not divisiveness, which I think voting 10 times and getting the same vote would do. So I like that this would move the board into a more collaborative process.
Thank you, Member Lear. I've got lights from Member Bogus. Member Bogus, I know your light was on for the previous motion. Okay. So for this amendment to the amendment, I believe we have Member Green.
I think mine is just more of a logistical question. When would that conversation happen? And I guess that was more of the board, when it was more of the board may use ranked choice voting. At what time does that conversation come up? And who decides to make that actionable?
That's a great question. And if the board will allow it, and Director Rasmussen, Ben, I hate to put you on the spot here. You usually sit up here when we do this, and so you've been through this process more than us. So can you just be available for questions? Because I've had some come up. I know I'm putting you on the spot here. So the question that Member Green asked, you may have heard that. When logistically would this take place? Like all of a sudden, we're saying after 3 rounds. Now we're saying after 3 ties, it shall go to a ranked choice voting. What would that look like?
So board staff would just have to be prepared to have some ranked choice ballots ready to insert names in before the election in the first place, if this is going to be part of the policy. And that's not too complicated to do. It's just, if we use the site that we've used the last few times, we just have to do a little legwork before the actual meeting so that if it came to that, it could be used. But it would just require a little legwork on board staff, regardless.
Thank you. Member Green, does that answer your question, or did we not get there? Please.
Okay, so are you saying that regardless, there would have to be people submitting before the 3 votes for a potential ranked choice voting? Is that what you?
So the policy already calls for candidates to submit names, and so that would be the same regardless. The only thing, the thing that we would have to do is we would just have to go into the website. Staff would just have to kind of pre-populate member emails and all the logistics so that if it came to ranked choice voting, we could fill in the candidate names at the last minute and send out the ballot.
May I?
Follow up?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
So you are allowed to submit your name for consideration at any time in those steps though, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would speak against the amendment in that, one of the drivers to my application to eliminate ranked choice voting was I think it just invites palace intrigue. I think there's a lot more math involved and vote swapping. And so by eliminating that, I think we avoid a lot of that intrigue. So I would speak against this because we're putting back in what the purpose of the motion is to remove. So thank you.
Thank you. So the motion before the committee, this is an amendment to amend is that the board change may to shall, so that the amendment would read shall use a ranked choice voting process. Back to Member Lear.
And Member Carey sort of addressed my other more general question of what was the purpose of changing this, because I thought the vote went swimmingly last time, and pretty effective, and I've seen this now 4 or 5 times, and not every time has it been to my liking, certainly, but it certainly seems more members get to participate, was my experience. So I kind of threw in my general comment. But I would ask then Member Carey, who opposes this, if we leave it as a may, what do we do? I mean, are we going to have, are we just going to keep voting and voting and voting and voting, or are we going to have an argument or a discussion with the board if there are 3 rounds or 15 rounds of not reaching that magic 8 number? I think it is healthy to have something in place so that it doesn't devolve into a personality discussion or a time-wasting experience if we have that happen. So what's the alternative, Member Carey? What do you see in using that, keeping that may there? If he chooses
If he
to
chooses,
respond.
I don't see a light. We might come back if he chooses to turn his light on. But let's go to Member Davis and then Member Green.
I'm just trying, the only option I see left, Chair, is that if it stayed a may, then it would just be the full board. Somebody could move. We voted 3 times. We're not getting anywhere. I move that we use ranked choice voting. And then the board would have to vote and get a majority vote to use ranked choice voting in the moment. Seems like if that's
That's the solution if this
it's
motion fails.
It's
Is that
cleaner
what
for
I'm
me
hearing?
for a shall, but if it doesn't pass, it's still a may. It seems like that's what the process is going to be, that board has the choice to do it to save time if they keep hitting against a wall.
Okay. So I don't see any other lights. Let's cue this up for, Member Earl.
What if this motion ties? Then what? No, I'm just.
It's the last time we call on you. So the motion before the board is that the board change may to shall, changing the verbiage at the end of this amendment, shall use a ranked choice voting process. Let's go ahead and vote. Okay, that motion fails. 10 in opposition, 5 in favor. Those in favor are Member Booth, Member Reel, Member Lear, Member Davis, and Vice Chair Wood. So that brings us back to Member Davis's amendment that reads that the board add after lines 56, after 3 rounds where no member receives the support of a majority of the board may use a ranked choice voting process. I think we're ready to vote. Oh, we have a light from Chair Carey.
Yep, thank you, Chair. This amendment, this motion, if it passes, would put us back in the same situation as if we didn't have ranked choice voting. If we're adding this to say, if the board repeatedly ties, this is going to be our fail-safe. But the fail-safe isn't a fail-safe because we could also tie. So if we could end up in a tie under the original scenario, by adding a fail-safe that's not a fail-safe where we still could tie, is that really accomplishing anything? And because of that, I would argue against the need for this motion, for this amendment, because it's not the sure way out. We could end up in the same situation. And so if we're going to rely upon the common sense of the board and the willingness to say, hey, we've all got to give a little and make this matter move forward, we could do that without this language.
Thank you. Let's go to Member Booth, then Member Davis.
I'd like to call the question.
There's a motion to call the question on this amendment here. So let's get that ready to vote.
I'll just withdraw my comment, and then you don't have to call the question if nobody else is wanting to speak.
Then let's vote on the motion. Just the amendment, Member Davis's amendment, right up here on the screen. That motion fails, 10 against, 5 in favor. Members in favor are Member Reel, Member Booth, Vice Chair Wood, Member Lear, and Member Davis. This brings us back to our underlying motion, which is that the board approve Board Policies 2002, Board Officer Elections Procedures, Draft 3. Seeing no lights, let's go ahead and vote. And that passes 13 in favor, 2 in opposition. Those no votes are Member Lear and Member Reel. Back to you, Chair Carey.
Next item is 5.6, R277609, Standards for LEA Discipline, Plans, and Emergency Safety Interventions Amendment. And the motion before the board is that the board approve R277609, Standards for LEA Discipline Plans and Emergency Safety Interventions, Draft 4, on second and final reading, and forward the rule to the Reports and Requirements Task Force for further refinement of the reporting and data collection requirements for the purposes of monitoring.
Thank you. I want to repeat that. It's a little bit different than what we're used to seeing, that the board approve, the motion before the board is that the board approve R277-609, Standards for LEA Discipline Plans and Emergency Safety Interventions, Draft 4, on second and final reading, and forward the rule to the Reports and Requirements Task Force for further refinement of the reporting and data collection requirements for the purposes of monitoring. Okay, so we have Vice Chair Hart, and then if I go down this list, it looks like Member Bogus, Member Earl, and Member Lear. Vice Chair Hart.
So the LRBI is in this rule. So if we go to section 3, lines 154, can we pull that up? 154.
This should be out of Draft 4. We're working off of Draft 4.
Draft 4, right. So on 154 starts, 154 through 166 is the incorporation of the LRBI. Now, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I love this tool as a practitioner. It's amazing. And so I'm just going to say right up front, I have a vested interest in getting this just pristine and perfect, and I apologize in advance. This tool saves teachers and administrators when when they need technical assistance, and it is a problem solver. So I'd like to make a motion, because there are some things that, and I've spoken with staff about this, that that they still can work on and need to work on, but we don't want to hold this rule up. So I'd like to make propose an amendment that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through 166. I'd like to remove that so that we can send the LRBI back, but yet we can move the rule forward. The rule needs to go forward, but there just needs to be a few more tweaks, and this allows staff time to make those tweaks. And like I said, this is something I discussed with staff. It's not a surprise or a concern, and I just want to give our professionals time to get it just right so that we don't have to keep bringing this back, but not hold up the rule. And I've spoke to my motion before I got a second.
Yes, you did.
Sorry.
There's a second to that. So the motion before the board is that the board amend R277-609 draft 4 to remove section 3 on lines 154 through 166. Now, before I turn this back over to Vice Chair Hart,
I already spoke.
who already spoke to it, there were lights from Bogus, Earl, and Lear that were for the original motion. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to keep you in the queue on my paper, but if you have comments to this motion, keep your lights on and we'll get to you there. Okay, so comments to this motion, Member Bogus.
Thank you, sir. So I actually don't have comments to this motion. I would like to move to recess for 6 minutes and set a timer. We do need a break, and I
we need
think
a
this
break.
is going to get long, and I think we are better served by a short break right now as opposed to moving this through, and I would like to set a timer.
Yeah, we have a timer. We can do 10 minutes, and keep in mind that we will stop at 11:30 to switch gears. Okay? Thanks.
So with respect, we're supposed to vote on that, but without objection. All right.